This video extends our lesson on slavery and racism from the textbook to help you get a 4 on our target. We're going to make some connections to today. Our target is to recognize and evaluate the causes of the secession of Southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War. We're looking at why did the Southern states secede from this Union and start the Civil War. And when we look at that target, often we think, oh, well, the South was quite different, and that's why the North was very different. And so what we're going to look at today is, were the South and the North really all that different? And what does that mean for the United States since that time? The United States after the Civil War. We're going to start with taking a look at some pictures. So right here we have a picture of an auction where they are auctioning off people to be enslaved. You can also look at pages 472 and 473 in the textbook where we have these two images of enslaved people. And think about, how do they make you feel? We can be very uncomfortable when we look at images like this, and they should make us uncomfortable. This is not a good part of history. And one of the ways that people deal with this discomfort, a very common way until just recently, and honestly, a lot of people still deal with their discomfort in the same way by saying, oh, slavery was just in the South. That's just that part of the country. That's not me. That's not my part of the country. And so that's not something that I really have to deal with. So we're going to take a look at racism and how does that relate? So let's think about the Industrial Revolution again. We started the semester talking about the Industrial Revolution, and we keep on adding more to it. Everything comes back here for this semester. In the North, how are people making their money? If you were wealthy in the North, or if you wanted to go get a job, you were making money from the Industrial Revolution by working in probably a textile factory. And in the South then, how does it relate? If a person was rich in the South, how were they making their money off of the Industrial Revolution? And then there's that whole other question. Could the factories of the North have survived and made that money if it weren't for the work of enslaved people in the South in the cotton fields? So if the North is making their money off of the factories, off of cotton, is that really something that they can say, oh, that's not us? Or is this the whole country that's involved? Because the people in the North, the banks in the North were making their money off of the plantations and the cotton trade in the South just as much. And they could loan that money then to people in the West. And so the whole country was affected by slavery. And let's take a closer look at who was doing the work in both the northern factories and in the plantations in the South. You probably already know this, but this is a map you haven't seen yet. The immigrant population, this is from 1900, but the numbers would have been a little smaller, and less people would be in these western parts of the U.S. earlier in the 1860s. But otherwise, the trend stayed the same. The darker colors show more immigrants, so we're looking at more immigrants up. Which region is this? Is this the North, the South, or the West? This map over here shows the enslaved population in 1860, just before the Civil War. Notice these borders right here. These are the state borders. This is the Ohio River. This is the southern border of Pennsylvania. And then we have Missouri down to Texas. And over here, this light-colored area is about the exact same place where you'd find this map. So we have the border of Pennsylvania right up here. We follow the Ohio River down. Missouri is right here, and then we go down to Texas. Which region has the most immigrants? Which region has the most enslaved people? Hopefully this is easy to remember by now. And then, which region has the most factories? Remember, in this map, red shows the more people working in manufacturing and trade, so the more factories are where it's in red. And the least people working in manufacturing and trade would mean that more people were working on farms and in agriculture. And so where do you find the farms, agriculture, plantations? Put the two together, the place where you have factories in the North, who's working there? Immigrants or enslaved people? And in the South, where you have more plantations, who's working on the plantations? Is it immigrants or enslaved people? So people in the South felt they needed slavery in order to have people to work in the fields. Why did the people in the North feel like they did not need enslaved labor? Why did they feel like they could have people working in their factories for cheap prices without having slavery? At the heart of the cheap labor in the US at the time, we have this idea of racism, the belief that one race is better than others. As the textbook said, in the North, there's also, just because someone is against slavery and is an abolitionist, does not mean that they are for equality. I have a lot of students say, oh, well, abolitionists wanted equality. That is definitely not true of most abolitionists. Most abolitionists said slavery is wrong, but they would not have wanted equality. They would not have wanted their white children going to school with African American children. You read about that more in the textbook. That was back then. So what about now? What can we say is a legacy of slavery and the racism of the 1800s now? One very specific comparison we can make is looking at this map of racial terror lynchings and the enslaved population. So I'm going to zoom in, go to the website of that racial terror lynchings map. So on here, this is a heat map. So wherever you see the brightest red, you see the most lynchings. A lynching at the very most basic level is basically a white mob going out and accusing usually an African American person of some kind of crime, not doing a trial or anything, and killing the African American. So it's a racial terror lynching. This is the numbers from 1877 to 1950. Lynchings became most common after the Civil War, especially after Reconstruction, at the time when it had looked like maybe African Americans would have a chance to fit into something resembling equality, and racial lynchings made it very clear that that was not going to happen. When we take a look at where lynchings happen, first of all, I just want to note that Kansas had 18 lynchings between 1877 and 1950. Okay, so Kansas is not immune. It happened all over the country. However, if you look at the map, you can see the most common down here by the Mississippi River and through the heart of the South. If you take a look at this map of where people were enslaved, here's the Mississippi River. So what does it look like? What can you say is the legacy of slavery? What is still left of it, even when slavery is gone? If you want more information about what lynchings were, give a little bit more if you want more information about what lynchings are, there's a video that I will attach to the assignment, so you can watch that if you need more information. But keep this in mind as you hear people talking about our history as our country, and as you hear people talking about racism. Keep in mind all the different forms that racism can take.